On the last episode of the Voice of Youth podcast, we had a chat to Joey Lim from Young Women Against Sexual Violence. This week, we'd like to share a different perspective on similar issues. Gaurav Shantakumar is the co-founder of Man Up, a Western Australian organisation looking to reshape the meaning of masculinity amongst young men. With its school and community-based programs, the organisation helps young men navigate the stigmas surrounding mental health, improve their relationships with women, and encourage accountability in male-dominated social groups. I'm your host Louis Carlish, and this is episode 12 of the Voice of Youth podcast, and here is our chat with Gaurav Shantakumar from Man Up. Yes guys, here we have Gaurav from Man Up. Thank you Gaurav so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
No worries, you good?
Yeah, I'm very good.
Good
Excited
morning.
to be here. Yeah.
We love what you do, and we think we're onto a topic which is really important, and it's great to have you down. So we'll get into it. So you're from Man Up, which is it's an organisation that you started. Why don't you talk to us about it?
For sure. Yeah. So Man Up, we're a not-for-profit organisation. I co-founded it at the end of 2019 with a close friend of mine called Haseeb.
Yeah.
And what we do is we go to high schools and we talk to young boys around forming healthier understandings of masculinity. So the idea is to break down the stigmas around men's mental health. Try to break down, I guess, the culture of what it means to be a man, especially in Australia, like where that's come from, and how we can transform it into a culture that's more like open, one where men can be more vulnerable. And also changing their attitudes when it comes to their interactions with women and the non-binary community, because all of it's interlinked. And so, we go to high schools and we choose this age range because this is when boys are forming their understandings of like masculinity, what it means to be a man, and hopefully in an effort to make them into better men.
Now, it sounds amazing, and it's again, like, must be so fulfilling for what you're doing. But where did the idea come from? Because obviously it's spoken about a lot, but not many young people within the community, especially males, might take those steps towards what you're doing. So where did the idea come from? Talk to us about that.
I might go on a bit of a tangent here, but the reason why I started it was really due to my own like mental health situation. So end of 2017 was pretty rough year for me. I was 19, just about to turn 20, and I guess, I don't know, on the outside things seemed to be going pretty well. Like I was doing well at uni, had a girlfriend at the time, had good friends, had like a career path set out for me, but I guess I was quite unfulfilled on the inside. I really wasn't sure who I was, what I was doing, what my purpose was. And what I guess most men would do in a situation like this is I just bottled in the way I was feeling. I didn't talk to anyone about my emotions. I kept to myself. And because I hadn't really learnt the healthiest coping mechanisms, I dealt with this in very unhelpful ways, whether that be excessive alcohol use, risky behaviors, driving really fast, which ultimately led down to a place of like self-harm, you know what I mean? Because I just didn't know how to sort of express these feelings inside of me. And also because, I was a man, I felt like I had to sort of be a certain way. Coming from a Sri Lankan background as well, mental health isn't really talked upon. And so I couldn't really talk about it with my family, or at least I felt like I couldn't. And so anyways, end of the year, it was like this big boiling pot where my girlfriend like broke up with me, and I was sort of left to like sit in this huge feeling of discomfort. And I was like, bruh, like what just happened? Like I lost everything I had like, I guess, wanted, you know what I mean? Because of these perceptions of who I thought I was, what it meant to be a man, blah, blah, blah. And so at the end of that year, I sort of had a choice. It was, I can continue living in this idea of what it means to be a man that's come down through history and stop talking to people, keep my emotions to myself, or I could man up in this sort of new way and be vulnerable and be open and start to embrace these challenges in like a healthier way. And so I started doing that. I started working on myself. I started eating well, drinking well, not drinking alcohol, like, you know what I mean?
Getting even more smashed.
I started exercising a lot, and I started fostering really helpful relationships with people, started talking to people around me. And in a matter of like 3 months, my life had improved significantly, you know what I mean? My mental health went up. And I noticed a lot of other guys started coming up to me, asking for advice because they were in a similar situation to where I was a few months ago. And so it wasn't until I went to this trip in Los Angeles, this leadership program I did, where I sort of shared this story, the one that I'm sharing with you guys. And like 20 American guys came up to me and they're like, hey bro, like that was so amazing. Like I really need to hear that. Well, but they were like, I realized how common it was as a problem. It wasn't just for me. It was for literally almost every guy that 100%. Felt like they couldn't be themselves. So when I came back to uni, I had one more semester left. I did this program called Launchpad that allowed me to work on any idea that I wanted. And so the problem I wanted to tackle was, men's mental health and men's suicide. How can we help this issue? And so that's how it sort of started. teamed up with my friend Asib, and the rest is history.
Amazing. Thank you again for sharing that story. Obviously, it takes courage to talk about anything to do with that. But that story is so common, isn't it?
Yeah.
I myself can relate to huge parts of that, and I'm sure many of the male listeners can relate to that as well.
Yeah.
So, why does Man Up exist, and why do you think it is necessary that not just Man Up, but organisations like yours do exist?
For sure. Yeah, so, as I sort of said, men's mental health is becoming an increasingly present issue.
Yeah.
Like we see now that 7 out of 9 daily suicides in Australia are by men, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, you start to wonder, like, why is this? Like, what is this issue? And, after conducting a lot of interviews with a lot of young guys, similar to your age, guys from different walks of life, they all sort of came to one conclusion, and it was this pressure to sort of be a certain way because I'm a man,
Mm-hmm.
But because everyone sort of feels this pressure, they all feel like everyone judges each other for it. And so I think the need for Man Up is like, how can we break this culture? Like, it's really a cultural shift.
100%.
And so that's like one side of it. And the other side of it is like the way that we interact with the women in our lives and the non-binary people.
Mm-hmm.
And, we see these stats, like 1 in 3 women have been sexually assaulted. Like, that's huge. And we know that it's probably higher than that, you know what I mean?
100%.
So
that's only the ones reported.
Yeah, those are the ones reported. And I believe that a big part of it is the way that men are unable to express sort of that stress that comes inside of them, and it can be expressed in these ways, these horrific ways, such as like sexual assault, and rape and things like that. And so if you can help guys to understand that it's okay to like not be this macho man all the time, and it's understanding that you have to have a balance of emotions, then perhaps we can prevent these issues from occurring. So that's why we exist.
100%. And you mentioned a cultural change, but it is almost like it's tradition.
Yeah.
A traditional man, has to run the house, can't speak out his feelings. It's a big, strong, broad-shouldered person.
Yeah.
What do you think that traditional male stereotype looks like? How do you think that negatively affects the male?
Yeah, and I want to, disclaimer here, like, we're never saying that to be like a traditional man is a bad thing.
No, 100%.
But like what we say is that there's a issue that arises when if you feel like you need to be that way all the time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like, the traditional macho man, like, it's cool to be it. If you're like that kind of person, like, be it. But if there's that pressure to sort of be it all the time, like, for example, we always say like, it's okay to be competitive when you're perhaps on a soccer field or playing footy. But then if you apply that same aggressiveness and competitiveness in your relationships at home, that's an issue, you know what I mean? So I think, sorry, I kind of lost the question.
But no, it's true. You were talking about that traditional male figure, and I think you hit the nail on the head. And like you said, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be this, if you want to, you can be that big, strong, broad male. But there's a time that, like you said, that you do need to be vulnerable. You do need to be able to I guess, open up in a way and discuss those emotions you're thinking. And you talked about those balance of emotions. Mm-hmm. An organisation like yourself, and for all males out there, how do you think we can improve on that?
I think the best thing is like awareness. So just start by first realising like perhaps your own actions. If anything I'm saying sort of hits true to you, like take a moment to reflect on that, because that's sort of like where the change happens. It's when you can stop and take a step back and notice your actions. Mm-hmm. That's probably the biggest way. Another way is talk to like the women and the non-binary people in your life and realize like how common it is of an issue, like these issues of sexual assault and all that kind of stuff. Because I think as men, we definitely have this sense of privilege where we don't even realize that we have it.
Yeah, of course.
And even the small things like walk into a car alone at night time, like we can just do it like it's nothing.
Male privilege.
Yeah, but obviously for anyone else, like it's actually something that they have to considerably think about. So that's another way of like increasing that awareness. Mm-hmm. And the third way is, and this is like the challenge, it's like you need to sort of step up in the sense of, because you're going to get resistance at the start, right?
Of course.
With your friends, because you're changing
100%.
People's attitudes and beliefs that they've known their whole life. I remember when I first started doing this Man Up kind of work, I had friends being like, "Oh, what is this? Like, are you teaching men to be like weak? Like, what's this? Like,
the P word as well."
Yeah, the P word, exactly. I don't want to. I'm not sure if I can say it on this podcast, but I was like, and so it was really discouraging for me because those are the guys I was trying to help. Like I was trying to show you because like you would end up like a dark path that I was. If you keep going this way, like I'm trying to help you, but
100%.
It wasn't like getting through to them. But I think as I kept on pushing this message, like not sort of giving up on it and realizing that if I can just help one person, that one person can then help his friends out, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like a ripple effect.
Huge.
And so what I've noticed in my friendship group is like over the last 3 years of like me doing this work, like my whole friendship groups have like transformed. Like we call each other out now. Like
Amazing.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
we talk about our emotions. We ask each other like, how's our mental health? Like
Yeah,
we say I love you. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
of course.
that's a big thing that we didn't used to do. So
No.
it's like normal now. I think that's the goal with this.
And that is obviously a progression from before, and I'll say it, toxic masculinity in a
Yeah.
way. I guess you aim to tackle that, or
Yeah.
you try to change the person instead of tackling it head on.
Mm-hmm.
What is toxic masculinity?
Yeah.
What does it look like?
Yeah, for sure. I think I sort of alluded to it before.
Yeah.
I think toxic masculinity is when masculinity gets taken out of context.
Right.
So, like I said, there's a time and place to
Mhm.
display certain emotions, and I think any human that's emotionally capable can understand like when to apply these emotions. But it becomes toxic, and the term toxic masculinity is the traits that are traditionally associated with masculinity. For example, independence, aggression,
Yeah.
breadwinner, self-sufficient, all this kind of stuff.
Right.
It's when those are then like twisted in a sense that like puts a pressure on a guy to sort of be that way all the time, because if he's not, then he's not a man. You know what I
No,
mean?
of course.
And so that's a toxic mindset in itself, like for me to be a certain way all the time. So I think that's the way that I like to describe toxic
Yeah.
masculinity, and I think it can be viewed as very different ways, but this is probably the most like easiest approach to understand it, right?
100%.
Yeah.
And definitely, and I guess what you said, toxic masculinity, it does lead to suicide rates,
Yeah.
bad relationships with women, which we're going to get into in a sec,
Yeah.
and other really negative effects.
Yeah.
I remember myself, and I guess, you know, the lads.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously there's two sides to it. You got your mates, but
Yeah, of
then
course.
also that lad stereotype's almost like,
Yeah.
it's not just one, it's a whole group. And like you said, you were talking about calling out people,
Yeah.
checking up on people.
Yeah.
That is missing though with males, and
Yeah.
it's quite obvious to see.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think, you know, like you said, you might lose friends.
Yeah.
Do you think it's possible for it to change? Do you think that, you know, one can be brave enough to step away
Yeah.
from that group of people?
Yeah.
Obviously, it's difficult. What
Yeah.
are your thoughts on the whole?
For sure, and that's like
lads?
the biggest thing. Like that's why what we're doing is a challenge, right? And
Yeah.
so when we go into high schools, one of our actual workshops is fully about it's like the boys' culture. So
Yeah.
you know you're familiar. Like it's this idea that like to fit in, you got to do certain things, and to be one of the boys, right?
No,
And so
been through it before, man.
yeah. So it's interesting because what we do is when we have the boys, like we get them to like list out the boys' moments, and
Yeah.
they'll yell out all the good ones, like, oh yeah, when we won the footy game. And I was like, all right, cool. But
Great.
how about some situations where perhaps you felt pressure to do something that you didn't want to do? And most of them will have an experience, whether it's like to drinking or getting with the girl or whatever it is, right? And so it's interesting because like, I think individually they know like they don't want to be doing this, but they don't want to sort of break that, the boys vibe.
No, of course,
you know
of
what I mean?
course.
But what you do is in that group, you make all of them notice that they all feel uncomfortable doing it. It's like, why are you doing it? You know what I
100%.
mean? And in itself, that is like an awakening within the group.
Definitely.
And from that, we then help them to understand how you can support one another, and you can call that, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, what we do is very idealistic. Like we give them like a sort of like step-by-step process on how you can call out your mates, right?
Right.
But I still make mistakes. I still say
of
dumb
course.
things all the time.
Of course.
And so the idea is, if you can just like catch yourself, that's like better than not doing anything. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? And slowly over time, it's going to become the new normal, right?
I guess if you can get to a point where you can point out yourself making a
Yeah,
mistake, I
yeah.
guess that's where
Yeah,
the level
and-
you're trying to be.
And another thing you said about like losing friends, I always say that if you're like living true to who you are and you're doing the right thing, those boys that go against you, they're not your friends. You
No,
know what I mean?
100%. Yeah.
Or maybe they're just not ready to change. And so in that situation, like it's okay to like, you don't have to like lose friendship with them, but you can spend less time with them, and you can show them a healthier way of living, and eventually either they will or they won't come around to it.
And I guess if they don't, then that's someone else's
Yeah.
problem. And I guess if we can, or as if you guys all change or change that culture,
Yeah.
they'll be the ones that will not even be forced to change, but will
Exactly.
recognise it in front of their eyes.
Yeah.
No, fantastic
Yeah.
example there with the boys. I think that's
Yeah.
a huge, massive.
Oh, it's huge, man. Yeah. And I still struggle with it, you
No,
know?
we all do.
Yeah.
We all do, and it's good to have the boys moments
course.
that after you're winning a game,
Yeah,
or
of
you do
course.
a great tackle or something. But
Yeah.
I guess, like you said, you know, there's some moments that might look like the boys, but they're completely opposite.
Yeah.
Self-damaging. Now that's the boys. We're going to talk about how toxic masculinity affects relationships with women. Now we've had previous podcasts on.
Yeah.
We had Joey from Young Women Against Sexual Violence talk
Yeah.
about it,
Yeah.
and you already mentioned it earlier. It's a huge problem, isn't it?
Yeah, it's crazy. as I said, 1 in 3 women are sexually assaulted. You know, I go to UWA, and it's a crazy statistic. 51% of people have been sexually assaulted at UWA.
And again, it's only the ones reported.
Yeah, and like that's huge, right? And so I think it's time where like, what is the correlation here? And obviously, sexual assault can happen to anyone.
Of course.
But we recognize right now that statistically, it's most other victims are women, and most of the perpetrators tend to be men, right? And like obviously, it can go either way, but I'm just saying that this is what is the majority.
Yeah.
And so, if the majority are men, like what is the culture around masculinity right now? You know what I mean? And we see that, this is the boys' culture, peer pressure culture to get with women. For example, even things like body count, like you know, hooking up with girls,
making a list,
and it becomes like almost like the goal,
and it becomes a trophy.
It becomes a trophy, and I think because men are very goal oriented, like it's good to apply it for like, you know, careers and business and games. But when it comes to like people, relationships, that's when it becomes dangerous. And so I always use my past relationship as an example. Like, although I didn't do anything abusive, there were definitely moments where like I didn't really recognize her like
100%.
emotions and her feelings, and like I said, I bottled in who I was and didn't open up to everything, and I could definitely see how that would have hurt her in a sense, right? And so if that was like one part of the like, tip of the iceberg, like you can see like the whole other area that exists. And so I think when it comes to talking about, you know, sexual violence and all that kind of stuff, it really does begin with us needing to step up and make a change. Like a lot of things are going against like women, like don't wear provocative clothes or don't walk alone at night. But that shouldn't be the issue. It's like tell men to start raping women.
Yeah, no,
you know
100%. I mean? That is.
Yeah, and like we don't want to say it in like an accusing way, because I know that the natural reaction for a lot of guys, myself especially, before
defense.
Yeah, you get defensive. You're like, I'm not a
defense.
rapist, right? But I read this really interesting quote in a book, and it was this, and it made me really ponder. The quote was, "No matter who you are, what kind of guy you are, at some point in your life, you have made a woman feel uncomfortable."
Yeah.
And you know, my original instinct was like, "Oh no, I haven't."
No,
then I started thinking about it.
How do you know as well?
Yeah. Maybe I looked at a girl for too long and it made her feel uncomfortable, or maybe I touched someone accidentally. Oh, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so it made me realize, like, oh shit, like there's this whole area that as men we're only realizing now that we've done to contribute to this issue. You know what I mean? Like we only hear about the high end things like rape and sexual assault, but the smallest things like saying a comment or a catcall can be traumatic for that girl in a sense. You know what I mean? So yeah, if we can change this culture where men like actually call each other out when they're making these remarks and notice it, then it's huge. But it does begin with first recognizing that it is an issue and talking to the women in your life, like realizing how common this is.
And it's like in the 12-step program, it's acceptance is the first one.
Yeah.
And once you get over that, then you can go and do everything else. But until you accept,
but you got to drop that ego, right?
100%.
And it's hard.
Break down those walls.
Yeah.
Be vulnerable if that is what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that you said that, because it is completely a cultural thing. Because boys can go up to girls and say things and will make them uncomfortable, because we know that could have a chance of leading to boys. And that's not to say girls might not go back on boys, but it's a high chance that a male making a female feel uncomfortable has a chance of possibly going further to abuse, rape, etc.
Yeah.
In our culture, if a girl said something to a boy, I won't be uncomfortable, because I know that in this culture, as bad as it is, it won't. It's a very unlikely chance.
Yeah.
And that's the horrific consequence of this tradition, or even this generational toxic masculinity thing that has come through. And we'll quickly go into that. Now we have talked about what it looks like nowadays in the generations that we're in and our mates and stuff.
Yeah.
But when you think about toxic masculinity, that it is such a generational culture, and we have mentioned changing that culture again. Yeah. How much do you think that impact of the old be a man?
Yeah, for sure.
Even still, we may change, but it's not enough, because it's still apparent.
Yeah.
We How much do you think that's had an impact on?
100%.
What have you seen from it?
I think, when I always look at this, I look at like my dad and the other dads of my friends, and we can see that even their behaviors are definitely like on autopilot. Like it's something that they've learned from their dads, and their dads learned from their dads, right? It's habits. And so like for them, like I use my dad as an example, like he's a very respectful guy, but he still doesn't really understand this whole movement around mental health. Like he doesn't really believe it. And so like for us and for our generation, I feel like the goal is for unlearning masculinity, you know what I mean? Like we need to understand like how can we step back, like become aware of these issues that are going around in society, like become aware of my dad's actions and realize that it's not his fault, but it's something that we now have the choice to change, right? Because like this is where we are in this world. Like there's a huge movement around it, right? And so like my goal is, you know, eventually as I grow older, because I'm not perfect, but I'm still learning so much about what I do. I make all these mistakes still, but I know that I'm making these mistakes almost out of like habit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you can't change a habit, right? It does take time, but it takes intention and time to do it. And so my goal is eventually when I get older and learn more about these issues around like male privilege and things like that, I can then teach my child in the future that it's like normal. He doesn't have to like 100%. He doesn't have to unlearn it. For him, it's like already like common knowledge.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
It's funny that you mentioned your dad. I'm almost like in the reverse. My dad is fantastic from day one. He's said the right things. We've entrenched the values almost, which is why I can say I've had the right ideas, but there's been some times where I can look back now and say it's shocking from my behalf. And that hasn't, and my dad's done everything he can. And obviously my mum has as well, but we're talking about from a male perspective. But you see on TV, you see social media, which is a huge one, and you just see modern around your friends. It's not enough to have. It's great. It's super important, but it isn't enough. And I guess that's where it's so great to hear that we do need to change to come from ourselves, from our friends, and we need to pull it together.
Yeah,
as you said, that generation needs to unlearn what masculinity is.
100%.
Now we talked about masculinity and you know, manning up in a sense, but we actually want to now know about your organisation itself.
For sure.
So what's your role specifically?
I don't really have like a role. So like it's funny because me and Asib, our role is just like co-founder, and essentially we're in charge of it, right? But our main sort of operations, the way that we work is, we contact schools. We tell them that we run 3 specific workshops. So the workshops are male culture, male relationships, and male coping. The male culture is sort of like our main one, and it's the one where we go into like unpacking what it means to be a man in Australia. Why is there a pressure to sort of be a certain way? We go into like calling out culture as well.
Right.
And we're about to reamp this one as well and introduce like porn as well and understanding.
Right.
Because that's a huge, understanding of everything for guys. So that's that one. Male relationships is how to identify healthy versus unhealthy relationships, especially romantic ones, as well as relationship with yourself, so you don't like compromise your values. And the third one is male coping, and that's more on the mental health sort of things, like how can you have support systems to keep you in check when things get rough, and who you can call that to. Me and Asib, we sort of have different roles. Like, I definitely look after more of like the marketing side of things as well. So a lot of like, we even have like our own little podcast, but it's a lot smaller than this.
Don't worry, shout out your podcast.
That's cool. Events, things like that. So for me, I'm really trying to get like a community push as well, because like our social media presence is very much university age students. And that's like we are a little bit older, so we have the power to influence change, whereas 100%. Our operations are more like the schools and like talking to kids directly.
And what do you think that made you take that extra step to establish the whole thing? Now, you talked about your story and your background. Have you seen like change from it? Yeah, for sure. It's difficult, right? Because you can't just go to a school and be like, oh, are they better men now? You know, it's going to take time. And there's no actual measurement.
There's no actual measurement. And when like, I guess business people ask me like, what are your metrics? I'm like, is he a good man? You know what I mean? But I think what you notice is there's just small interactions you have. For example, so I work at Macca's as well as a shift manager part-time. Right. And it's cool because I work with a lot of 15, 16, 17-year-old boys.
Prime age.
Yeah. And I use it obviously to manage, but I also use it as a way to sort of role model behaviors to them. And so I'm working with a lot of kids from, areas outside of the GT as well. So they don't really have these figures and like resources as we have had, growing up in these areas. And so when there was a situation actually so all the kitchen boys are like most of them are all boys, right? There was like 1 or 2 girls that work in the kitchen. Anyways, there was the time when all the boys would just keep chatting shit, you know what I mean? And they would make all these kind of sexist comments. But there wasn't like intentional, it was just like them chatting. And
100%.
The girl kind of came up to me and she was like, can I please talk to you in the office? And I was like, sure. And she told me how like she feels really uncomfortable, like they're talking about hooking up with all these girls on the party on the weekends, talking about boobs, or, all this kind of stuff. She felt really uncomfortable. So I was like, shit, like as a man up kind of man, I want to sort of, I guess, see if I can influence some change. And so I brought each of those boys in like one at a time, and I had a chat with them. Like I wasn't trying to be mad at them, but I was like, boys, you need to understand that like there's girls here, and as you grow older, like what kind of man do you want to be? And like I fully had a chat with them, and 2 out of 3 of them took it the wrong way and was like, oh, what's this, you know. But then the third one, he like left the kitchen group chat, decided to like step up and, you know what I mean, like call it out whenever it happened. And so that's one person making a difference.
And that is, like you said, that's huge.
That's huge, right?
It's a ripple effect.
And so you notice that when that kid started doing it, his friends started doing it in the kitchen. And now none of them do it anymore. You know what
Incredible.
I mean?
And you've created an environment from just one person making change to a whole, a safer place.
Yeah.
Amazing, fantastic story. And I guess, like you said, you can't measure,
you
can only see what's in front of you.
Yeah.
But you can have that trust, I guess, that has had an effect.
Yeah.
And we talked about teenagers.
Yeah.
And you guys do awesome work in schools. Do you think those schools specifically can do a bit more? I think they can, but obviously this is your area, man.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's hear it.
I always say like my goal for Man Up is for our content to be in the Australian curriculum, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not there.
No.
So I definitely think schools can do a bigger job, but it's really not up to them. It's up to the government to make a
100%.
change when it comes to like the rules. I think the biggest one that needs to be updated is like consent education as well.
Yeah, 100%.
Because I went to school, I had probably like 2 sex ed classes,
Oh,
and all we learned was like
the
how to
penis
put, like,
gets
the
licked.
penis, like
a
literally,
condom on
you know what I mean, like
on
nothing.
a banana.
Didn't learn anything about like when it is appropriate to like ask someone for their consent or like what it means and you know, the whole thing. And it because like it's such a taboo in society, but like it shouldn't be a taboo because that's the taboo that leads to like these issues that we see these days. And so I think schools, if anything, if they had the power to influence the government to like change and put in things like that, and I think as teachers from our generation become teachers, they're gonna make change in this space as well. So
Definitely.
it's exciting to see. But 100%, schools can be doing more. You know,
100%. Well, I remember from my sexual education classes, the funniest thing is the only memories I have is what was the funniest story, the laughs that we had.
Yeah.
There was nothing I cannot remember honestly about consent, about the respect towards and how you approach the whole topic. So that was just my experience, and I can at the school that I went to, I'm sure 100% many of the kids can vouch, and especially the boys.
Yeah,
I mean.
sure.
The boys moments, there were so many of them in sexual education class, and that's shocking.
Yeah.
And even the teachers were almost, you know, getting...
Or we have like the awkward PE teacher like giving to us, you know what I mean?
100%. Like you said, it's got to start from the top, it's got to start in there. And your work specifically, that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
So,
thank you.
From your perspective, do you think that obviously with the help of schools, with people, it is achievable? Obviously it's a long, and you not almost have to say yes, but how do you think that's going to happen?
I don't know, to be honest. You know what I mean? I think, you know, you look at all these issues, especially like other issues from the past, like, you know, getting the rights for like women to vote and even like the civil rights movement. I think it all began with just like small things that built up into a point where there was like a shift in the energy in the world, right? And so I think what's going to happen with the government is they're going to be almost forced to like put these things in. Yeah. And I'd hate for it to be like a reactive thing. Like there should be a proactive measure.
100%.
But, you know, if Man Up exists and then there's like other organisations that do the exact same work as we do and everything's happening from the bottom up, like you can see that the government's eventually going to feel this pressure like, ah, shit, you know what I mean? Yeah. Because people are going to start rebelling against it, and you see like things happening, like even the Black Rights Movement and things like that in America, right? Like,
as bad as that was reactive, completely reactive. But
huge.
Can't say it didn't.
Because like it only took like all those votes and all those things to happen, people dying, for the government to be like, I bet this can happen in our state now. You know what I mean?
100%.
Yeah.
And well, summed up really well. Hopefully that can happen. Yeah. Quickly before we do let you go, is there any community programs coming up within your movement?
Yeah, so we tend to do some check-ins.
Right.
So this is the way that we engage with the community. So whether that's like a soccer game with like a time to check in, so boys will have the opportunity to like go in a circle and share what's on their minds. And this is for like university age students. So the next one we've got coming, we're actually partnering up with the gym that I do boxing at. So it's called Champions Gym.
Amazing.
Which is pretty sick. So it's going to be like an event. You can come down and you have a boxing class, and then afterwards we'll like have a sausage sizzle and like a little chance to like share what's on your mind. We're also having like an annual quiz night. So that's happening on the 3rd of September.
3rd of September.
That's like the chance for you guys to sort of help us on our mission through like monetary ways. Like it's
we'll
fundraising
be sharing it, man. We'll be there if we can.
Yeah, or get a table. It'll be sick. And it's like a really fun night. It's not necessarily like us teaching you anything. It's just having a good night and raising some money for us to continue doing our work.
Of course.
That's just the main things in the works right now.
Amazing. And just before we do let you go, what are some everyday things that as people, and even for me, what can we do to identify it and help make that change, even if it is to just one person?
Yeah. The biggest thing is understand like what is important to you. Like like take a moment to reflect on who you are and what you value, and understand like where did that come from, and then do your best to not like stray away from that. Because when you are yourself, you inspire other people to be themselves.
100%.
And I think that's the main message here.
Yeah, right. Gareth, thank you so much. All of Man Up stuff will be in the links in our description, website, Facebook. We'll try and share it all, and for those events as well, we'll help push it as well. Gareth, thank you so much. You've been
thank you so much for having me.
Awesome topic, guys. This has been this has been a really important topic to have. So to have people like Gareth being able to come on here, it's huge for us. So we really hope you enjoyed. We really hope that you did listen, and even if you did take away one thing, so important, and hopefully we can as a group tackle this together.
That's sick. Thank you guys, and it's amazing what you're doing. So keep it up. Keep spreading these messages.
Stuff it, man.
This is how you do it. You change the world through young people. So.
Of course, man. Youth empowerment and all that.
Yeah,
brilliant. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for listening. I've been your host, Louis Carlish. We hope you've enjoyed this Voice of Youth podcast episode. Stay safe, and we will see you soon. Bye bye.